Got to make a video here on YouTube, and this is Joe Paquette, a good friend of mine, and this is Joe, right here.
Yeah.
And he's been a motorcyclist for many years. Joe, how old were you when you had your first bike?
Well, my first fascination with motorcycles was when I was about 15, watching my brother and his gang. He was 2 years older, and they'd be driving out of town in their motorcycles as a group. And then I went off into the Navy, and during one of my first summers home on leave, my brother's motorcycle had been impounded. So we made a deal that if I got the bike out of the impounding yard, I could ride it for the rest of the summer. The only problem was I'd never driven a car, I'd never driven a motorcycle, I'd never had any instructions whatsoever, and I didn't know where the yard was. I had no way to get there. I got my father to ask a friend, drove me outside of Montreal, up into the northern townships, found the yard, found the motorcycle, found out a wire was sticking out of the gearbox, which it turned out was the clutch, and with no way to repair it, no way to shift gears. The fellow who ran the yard was kind enough to show me how to crash shift the Norton 500, and off I went, back down onto the autoroute, back into Montreal on my first driving experience.
And you were 15 without a license driving on the road?
I was 16 or 17, and of course I had a license because in Quebec in those days, all you had to do was go down to the motor vehicles, answer 25 questions, and if you got them right, they stamped your sheet and you now had a motorcycle license.
Okay.
So I drove that Norton for that whole summer. I was the hero of the neighborhood. Always had to make sure if any girl was riding with me, she was tall enough to push start and then jump on the back. And the best of my recollections, I drove it crash shifting without a clutch for the rest of the summer.
So you must have had lots of girlfriends, did you?
Not with those conditions, no. But at that time, most of the families wouldn't have let you even park near the house if they thought their daughter was on a motorcycle. You became persona non grata.
Okay. And you had other bikes. What was the make of that bike?
That was a Norton 500 or 600. I've always said it was a Norton Commando, and people tell me that that would have been 1961. And I guess at that time there wasn't a Norton Commando, but I don't know where else I would have ever heard the name, and I don't expect my brother had a brand new bike. But it was a 500 to 600 Norton. I don't remember much more about it, and I don't even know where it went. I think I asked my brother once, because the next time I come back from the Navy, I never rode it again. He went on to get a Honda Goldwing in the days when they were just the motorcycle with no fairings and no bags, and I never drove another one of his motorcycles again.
And he had some other motorbikes after that?
Yes, each one seemed to be a cause. The second motorcycle, or the first motorcycle I ever owned, was a Suzuki 175 two-stroke, and by this time I was in Winnipeg, and I wanted to leave my town to go to the nearest training base. I had talked my boss into allowing me to take the helicopter conversion course, but I couldn't leave my wife and my 4 children at home without a car because I was going to be at the training base from Monday night till Thursday night. So I had to find secondary transportation. Now, believe it or not, it was in March in the prairies, and I bought this Suzuki 175. You had to pour the oil in and mix it with the gas, so I always had this messy bottle of oil in my under my seat. And for the course, I just drove the motorcycle out every Monday afternoon, and came back on Thursday so that I could work in my office on Monday, and I could be working in the office on Friday, and in the meantime I used the motorcycle out at Portage la Prairie. One morning I didn't leave on the Monday, but I left on the Tuesday. So I had to be very early in the morning because I was going to be flying when I got there, but not expecting to get the first flight of the morning. Now, having done 60 miles in traffic and the cold and the noise, by the time I got to the base and my instructor popped in and he said, "Okay, let's go flying." And we did, and he brought me back about 10 minutes later. He said, "You're useless to me. Go back in, warm up, relax, and I'll pick you up on a later cycle," which he did. I mean, that morning I had to pry my hands off the clutch and the brake because it was just that cold.
Obviously, you weren't wearing proper motorcycle gear back then.
I guess we had helmets. I know the first year in the Norton we didn't have helmets, and certainly had no gear. I think I picked up a $10 full face helmet with no visor that somebody had repainted. God forbid. I know I did not have boots. Whatever gloves I had. In fact, I didn't get proper motorcycle gear for another couple of decades. But I had a lot of fun on that bike. We were out in the prairies. I'd take it out into the sand dunes and try to do a little bit of off-road stuff. I remember getting stuck in the bottom of this sand pit and having to push and carry the damn Suzuki to the top. So I think that was probably the end of that kind of fun. I kept the Suzuki for only about 2 years. I think I got sick and tired of people pulling into me or cutting in front of me. I remember coming back and saying, "That's it. Too many people are trying to kill me," and selling the bike. And off went the Suzuki.
I find sometimes the smaller bikes are harder to see because of their physical size, by people. But
yeah, I completely agree with that because I certainly have a problem with my next bike, which was a Honda 360T. Again, you had people, often cutting you off or not realizing you were there. It could be that motorcycles weren't so prominent, but I think you're right. I think not the kind of problem I ever had once I got into large touring bikes.
And you had other bikes than that, I gather?
Yeah, the next one was a 360T. I remember I was tickled with it. I bought it when I was in Shearwater, Nova Scotia.
That's a Honda? Or?
It's a Honda, yeah, a Honda 360, and a twin cylinder, and 4-stroke. And I remember that years after it had come and gone, I happened to pick up a magazine, and it was discussing the 4 worst motorcycles ever built. And I think my 360T was about number 8. And the 2 things that were a problem, one was it was very heavy steering. Well, I didn't know that. I hadn't known any better. And the second item was that it had a tendency to throw the timing chain, which was internal. So when the timing chain went, your engine was literally destroyed. And in the end, that's what happened to the 360T. In the meantime, we had started my long-distance touring career. My wife and I went from Halifax to Oak Island and stayed for the weekend at the inn out there and explored Oak Island back in the days before anybody was doing any digging around there. And I remember taking another trip from Prince Edward Island to Greenwood, and that was about the limits of my touring on the 360.
About what age were you then?
That would have been about 82, so I was probably 30, 40, probably 40 years of age.
Okay. And your next bike?
Well, the next one, after the 360T died on me, and it literally died. We were driving to the drag races at Oyster Bed Bridge in Prince Edward Island, and all of a sudden the engine was turning over, but nothing was connected. And I think I went for about another year without a motorcycle, and found out that the local police chief was selling his Honda Silverwing, I think, yeah, Silverwing it was called, and it was a 500cc V twin, with the V being like the Moto Guzzi, so it was fore and aft in the, or sorry, not fore and aft in the bike, but both cylinders protruded out each side. It was a full bagger. Everything was, if you think of a Goldwing and bring everything down in size, probably a little bit like the 1300 that Honda's putting out, or put out until a little while ago. So it had integrated bags, integrated trunk, and full fairing, and it was a fine little bike. Maroon, if I remember right. It was the start of my red bikes, and I remember taking the longest drive I ever did in that was Montreal to Quebec City, I think for a meeting. So I was in National Defense Headquarters in Ottawa. Sorry, not Montreal, in Ottawa. And I had a meeting in Quebec City, and I used the Silver Wing to drive there. I didn't have any motorcycle gear. I was wearing my parka with about 4 layers underneath, and sometimes I'd pack newspaper. And I think by the time I got to Quebec City, it was dark and it was cold. And I kept that bike for another, I think, 2 years. And then my daughter, this is all in Ottawa, my daughter was getting married, and I needed some money to carry out the wedding. And I remember we were having a bit of a pre-wedding reception in our living room when this young couple came down to purchase the Silver Wing, and that was the end of that for, oh goodness, that would have been, let's see, I'll check my notes here. I think the Silver Wing went in '88, and I didn't get my next motorcycle until '92.
And the next one, what type of bike was that one?
The next one was a Honda Goldwing. I had a friend of mine who had this beautiful Goldwing, and he always, we flew together in Summerside in the Search and Rescue Squadron, and he always had the Goldwing. And I had the Silver Wing, and he'd look at me and say, what you got to do is get yourself a Goldwing. And I said, well, Monty, if you ever find me a $3,000 Goldwing, I said, I'm with you. Well, I was now retired, so I was about 49. In fact, I think I was 50. It was my 50th birthday.
What model was that?
And it was, he had a 1984 Honda Goldwing 1200. And he called me up one day and he said, I'm getting a new Goldwing. He said, how would you like to buy my old one? I said, what was the price? He said, well, you said $3,000. And I said, yep. He said, well, I guess $3,000. I said, okay, that's a deal. And at that time, he lived in Moncton, and I lived in Yarmouth, and it was March. And a typical, maritime March, and made the deal, and I don't remember how I got to Moncton. Somebody must have dropped me off. But anyway, we made the deal in his garage, and I drove off with the '84 Goldwing, and decided that I would take the ferry since it was far too cold to do the whole thing by road. And again, all I had was a parka, some gloves, some old helmet, and off I went from Moncton to St. John to the ferry. Took the ferry over in the snow, nothing on the ground, but it was snowing. And I got off the ferry on the other side, and just as soon as I got on the road, I was pulled over by a policeman who wanted to check my safety sticker. And all of a sudden I panicked and I thought, oh, geez, I didn't even ask Monty about a safety sticker. And he sort of started to inspect the bike, and he said, oh, it's from New Brunswick. He said, you don't have to have a safety sticker. Carry on. And off I went. And with the '84, I started touring. Ironically, I had the '84 in Yarmouth the first year that Yarmouth had ever held the Goldwing Rally, and that's the international one. And yet somehow or other I couldn't see hopping on my motorcycle and going down the road 2 blocks to where they were holding the Goldwing Rally. So instead of sitting around town watching all these guys driving around the Goldwings, or going to this Goldwing Rally just down my street, my wife and I decided to get out of town, and we did our first camping trip with the Goldwing, and we went to the Ovens in Lunenburg. And we packed our sleeping bags and our tent. There was no room for camping gear, but at the Ovens campground you could eat right at the restaurant. There was a restaurant right in the middle of the campground, and it served breakfast, lunch, and supper. And when we got there, they had the overflow was being used, and they said, would we mind? And we said, no, where's the overflow? And they pointed down by the restaurant, and we ended up camping right on the cliff face, within a stone's throw of the restaurant. And when we woke up the next morning, we opened the tent flap, and honest to goodness, the Blue Nose was sailing by. It just didn't get any better. So with that Goldwing, we found out about Americade, which is the big rally in New York up at Lake George. And I went to that. My first year, I think, was in about '63. I went alone. Met up with the fellow who had sold me the bike, Monty, and some friends of his, and had a great time. Went off riding back to Montreal to go home, and then met them again later on in September of that year, and we did a trip around the Gaspé. One of the stories from Americade on that first day was after I had put my tent up in a bit of a rain showery day, and I was hot and wet and sticky, and I was quite a ways out of town. I was in Lake Lucerne, or in Fort Lucerne or something. It was about 11 miles away from the where the Americade rally was held proper. And anyway, I had to get out of my tent and out of my tent ground and my campground, and hopped on the bike as soon as the rain stopped and the sun came out steaming, and headed off into town. And here beside the road was this bar all by itself, gravel parking lot, about a dozen Harleys parked there. And I thought, I don't care, I want to go in and have a beer. And I sort of parked the Goldwing and wandered in, and it was rough. There was more hair and leather in that place than I'd ever seen in my life, and I sort of walked up towards the bar to order my beer, and trying to be very inconspicuous. And there was a fellow sitting at the bar, and he turns to the bartender, a lady, and he said, Mabel, can I have a nice tea, please? He says, decaf. And of course, this shocked me. This wasn't exactly classic biker behavior. And he turned around, and he must have caught me out of the corner of his eye and knew exactly what was going through my mind. And he turned around and he said very quietly, you never know, do you? So that was a start. My association with Harleys, my association with the biker community, and my association with doing longer distance touring.
And you kept that bike how long?
Well, that bike I kept, let's see, I got it in 92. It was an 84. It had about 70,000 kilometers on it, and I put on probably another 70,000. And in 1999, I started to look around a little bit. I was working overseas 6 weeks at a time, and I was really struck with the Honda Valkyrie. Except, I needed the bags, I needed the trunk, I needed the intercom. I was so used to that sort of stuff, or the radio. And, the Valkyrie, when it first came out, didn't have any of that. And then my wife sent me an article when I was overseas, I think in Burma, and she said, your Valkyrie has just been introduced. And she sent me a picture of the Valkyrie Interstate, I think it was. and it had the trunk and the bags and cruise control, I think, and a couple other things. And I was excited. I came home from that trip ready to buy this Valkyrie. And I looked at it down in Halifax. I was still in Yarmouth at that time. I looked down in Halifax and checked on the prices. I was going to buy it brand new. Sat on it, and I sort of wasn't sure. It looked kind of out of proportion when you sat on it. The gas tank was big. The engine, because it was all visible, the lower cylinders seemed to overpower. Anyway, I still wanted my Interstate, and I went to the local Honda dealer in Saunierville, and the idea was to go up and ask him if he could get me one, if he had one. I walked in the door in Saunierville, and immediately to my left was a 99 Goldwing LE, the top of the line, maroon, red. Andre would know because he bought it from me 10 years later, or 12 years later. Anyway, I fell in love with that thing, and the Interstate left my mind, and within an hour I had bought myself a brand new 99 Goldwing 1500. And that was really the start of long distance touring.
So you traded in your 1200 or what?
I traded in the 1200, and in fact, Alain, who always did the maintenance on my bike in Comeauville or Saunierville or wherever the heck Comeau is, he bought it from me. I think I got $6,000 for it, $3,000 more than I paid. And of course you're buying and trading in, so the exact numbers really don't matter, but I bought the Goldwing for $25,000 with a $6,000 trade-in.
Yeah, Alain still has that bike, matter of fact.
And the last time I went out behind the Honda dealer, there was the old Goldwing sitting there. I assume he's still using it for his commute back and forth.
Yeah.
And but the 99 was just an entirely different world. The intercom was included. It was integral to the bike. Instead of us trying to connect to each other with extra devices, the clarity was perfect. The radio could be transferred front to back. We could both listen to it. Joan was so comfortable on that thing she would fall asleep. And yeah, then we did some long distance touring. The first of it was on my 60th birthday, so let's see, that would have been 2002, and I had in my mind that I wanted to do a horseback riding trip. And I had a horse when we were in Prince Edward Island, and enjoyed riding it, but I used to get these little brochures from a company in Banff, and I thought, I really would like to do that. It was not very expensive. It was about $700 for a week, and I called up Joan's brother-in-law Kevin, and I raised it with him, and he said, fantastic idea, I'd love to do it, and made the plans, bought the trip. And it involved basically going out to Banff. They'd give you the horse, and you'd leave on day one, go to basically a campground. It was all pre-set up and wire fence to keep out bears. But you were in a tent, and it was in September. The nights were cold, but you would stay there for a couple of days and do trips out every day. And then you'd go another day-long trip to another camp, and then you'd trip out of there, and then you would come home on the seventh day.
Was Joan on that trip with you, or
that was all horseback riding. I wore the riding gear that I had now acquired. I wore my riding boots. I wore my tilly, and I wore my riding jacket and my riding gloves, and I fit right in.
Yeah, well, I was asking, was Joan with you that trip?
Well, what we did was we had been talking to friends, and these friends, who were also bikers, had talked about doing a motorcycle trip where They were going to ride out to San Francisco, and the wives were going to fly, and then the wives would come back. And I thought about that, and thought, wow, that is the answer, because if you want to travel any distance, and you want to make the miles up, and you know, Joan just wasn't going to enjoy 10 hours on a motorcycle in a day with minimal stops. So based on their plan, I had her go out and visit her sister in Calgary, and I drove the bike out, actually by Port Dover and Friday the 13th, and a couple other spots, and met up with her in Calgary, and then I and her brother went off on our horseback riding trip, and then came back a week later. She'd had her visit with her sister. We hopped on the motorcycle and headed off south to the Grand Canyon and Las Vegas. And it was a marvelous trip. We had, I think, almost perfect weather, great camping. We had campground we visited Yosemite, we visited Yellowstone, I mean, everything on the way down to the Grand Canyon. Had a site by the washrooms, by the walkway, and ironically, you could leave your campground, you could leave your tent, walk 500 feet through a hedge, and you were in the shopping area where all the buses went to take you around the Grand Canyon. We woke up one morning with Joan sort of whispering to me about 6 o'clock in the morning, you know, come and look at this, and I expected to look out and see a chipmunk or something. And I sort of knee-walked over to the door of the tent, and we had about a 900-pound elk literally lying on our tent ropes. Apparently they'd come down in there to get away from coyotes that would be harassing them if they weren't in the campground. I mean, it was just an incredible sight.
Yeah, that's kind of neat, yeah.
Incredible sight. And then we went off to Las Vegas, and in Las Vegas we stayed in a hotel and had a great time. And then there was the art of the motorcycle, and it was a major display that had been in the Guggenheim, but she was working, she was running out of time, so she flew home from Vegas. I stayed on for an extra couple of days and took in the art of the motorcycle, which was showing in the Venetian Hotel, and then I did a early morning ride up to Reno, Nevada, across the desert, and I stayed there in a hotel for a couple of days and went to the Reno air races, and then headed home solo down through the States. I think by the time I got home, I had been on the road for 2 months, and honest to God, I could have turned around and done it all over again. It was the bike was perfect. Some cold nights in Kansas in the tent, and of course the cold nights tenting on the horseback trip. But the riding was just amazing.
And you heard you also that you had made some other trips.
Well, that was in the 80. In the 12, no, that was in the 99 Goldwing. So yeah, we had not been coast to coast yet, and that was still a dream. So in 2004, my Navy course was having a reunion in Victoria, and again started planning and plotting, and came up with this. Everything was multi-course. So we left about mid-August. Joan's family was having a reunion in outside of Cranbrook in Mission, BC. So we got the family up there, and we arrived by motorcycle. I think it was maybe our 25th anniversary or our 30th anniversary. Had a tremendous family reunion. We had gone out camping, on the motorcycle, and stayed with in a hotel with the family for the reunion, and then left from there on a rainy day up through the mountains to Jasper, Prince Rupert, and got on the inland ferry up to Alaska. And on the way to this reunion in Victoria, we decided we would do it via Alaska. Prince Rupert, we had a friend who lived there. We stayed there, left our trailer in Prince Rupert because it was too expensive to take it on the ferry. And then about a 2 or a 3 day ferry ride from Prince Rupert to Haines, Alaska. And we had a bed and breakfast at Haines, and hopped on the bike the next day, and a little 2-lane road from Haines, Alaska, up through British Columbia to the Yukon, to Haines Junction. And the funny thing about that part of the country is that you leave Alaska and you drive north, and the first thing that happens is you on this little 2-lane road, and the first thing that happens is you go into New Brunswick or into British Columbia, and then after you pass through British Columbia, you enter the Yukon. So at the border of Alaska and British Columbia, on this 2-lane road, we have a young French customs agent comes out and looks at the two of us on the motorcycle, all by ourselves, and says, "Are there just the two of you?" And of course, it was not long after 9/11, and you really didn't want to be lippy with any customs people. And I sort of sat there, sort of biting my tongue for a while, and finally I said, I can't believe you said that. And she says, "Me neither." And explained that she gets used to saying the same thing to people. And
Yeah.
so anyway, we carried on through British Columbia, and you enter into the Yukon at Haines Junction. And our destination was a bed and breakfast in Whitehorse. And in Whitehorse we stayed in this bed and breakfast that in fact had been the original home of the fellow who wrote Cremation of Sam McGee, who is, oh God, I can't remember. I didn't know it so well. It was a tremendous area. We drove out towards the border with Alaska again, but mostly just explored Whitehorse, and then a day later or two we headed down to Skagway, where we were going to meet the ferry again to go back to Prince Rupert. I've got to tell you, the ride from Whitehorse to Skagway is probably one of the most incredible, I think maybe 100-mile stretches in the world. First of all, you're riding the route that the gold miners did in reverse, because they landed in Skagway and they did the Chilkoot Trail up to Whitehorse, and then on to Dawson, and on to the gold fields. And we were going in the opposite direction. There's the first thing you come across at Carcross is desert, a true desert, right in the middle of the north. And I mean, sand dunes, arid, incredible. And then you're into an area which looks like a moonscape for about, I would say maybe 30 miles. It's so rough that the American border is not at the border. The Canadians and the Americans have both set up their border crossings where it's more habitable, and there's about 10 miles of no man's land. You've left Canada. You haven't left Canada, but you've already checked out through the border, and you haven't arrived in Alaska, but you're already in Alaska. You pass the border sometime in this terrible stretch of territory. You'd look at the road, and the signs for the depth of the snow are actually hung overhead, because they would be too high and buried if they were done on the side, and the plows might hit them. So you can imagine what this is like. On the left side of the canyon, because there's a water course there, you can actually see the White Pass railway line, which really hugs the mountain cliff on the other side. It starts in Skagway and goes up, I think, to Carcross, but it doesn't go all the way to Whitehorse. Skagway itself, amazing town. It's so touristy now. When we got in there was 8 cruise ships sitting in the harbor, either at anchor or alongside, and I mean, they empty out, maybe 10,000, 15,000 people at a time, and they just inundate Skagway. And at 8 o'clock, when they've all left, you could play baseball on the main street. There's nobody left, except maybe a couple of hundred locals. But we stayed in a hostel, and they gave us, well, it would be one of these little yard sheds that you would see anywhere else. We said we'd like a double room, and they said, well, we could put you in the dollhouse. And the dollhouse was one of these garden sheds. It was just big enough for the bed and allow you to open the door. It had no electricity. It had a little miner's cap hanging on the hook inside. The washroom was in the main house, so you had to walk across the front lawn to the main hostel. But it was a very inexpensive, wonderful place to stay. Met some fascinating people. And ironically, now we're talking mid-September, and we're in Alaska, waiting to come home. And I had called somebody about the wisdom of being in Alaska in September, and it was a Goldwing member from Whitehorse, and they said, we're in the rain shadow of the mountains. The weather will be fantastic. And she was right. We were sitting outdoors at 25 degrees looking at the glaciers